What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Damp Valley coming at you with another mailbag. Before we get started, the usual reminders, please, you can support the show by subscribing to the show. And if you have subscribed to it, make sure you've subscribed across all platforms, wherever you get your podcast, plus YouTube as well. Like, comment on YouTube videos to help the algorithm love us back. Also, write reviews and ratings on Apple and Spotify. That helps us out a crap ton as well. And if you have done all those things, please word of mouth recommendations, shout us out on Twitter, retweet our promo since the algo hates us because we won't pay for Twitter Blue. I make no apologies for that one. And follow us on all the socials at HardwoodKnocks on Twitter and TikTok and at Hardwood_Knocks on Instagram. Let's pillage through what is a bunch of mailbag questions. I'm going to try and hold myself to a 45-minute limit, and I can finish up the rest on another occasion. But we'll begin with, and this is fairly topical since all these all rookie, all NBA teams were released this week. But Austin asks, the question was, where is it? Oh, with all NBA teams out and a lot of them not making the new requirements for games played, do you think we'll actually get more games out of stars next season, or will we start seeing lower tier players win all the awards? I know Draymond's concern was that we would see lower tier players win the awards. I think that that's a distinct possibility. And I think, look, when you look at just the all NBA teams in general, I don't know that I had any just stark issues with them. Um, I get, well, I don't get. I know some people were annoyed that Luka Doncic and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander made the cut when their teams didn't even make it out, or two in Luka's case, the play-in. Those teams were demonstrative net plus when those two were on the court. Do we penalize them for the minutes that they're not on the floor? I guess the argument then becomes that, well, they could have elevated their team to greater heights while they were on the court or in certain games, because then their team would have been better off. You need to make the case to me that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander wasn't a top 10 NBA player this year. And I don't think winning necessarily needs to be criteria here. So, I mean, the thing that stood out, I was a little bit surprised that Jaylen Brown made second team All NBA. That did take me off guard a little bit. Nothing else really shocked me though. And I don't think that there were any just super egregious, incredible snubs. And as always, when you're going to list the snubs, you have to say who you're going to bounce off. And so if you wanted to bounce Julius Randle off for Pascal Siakam, or for, Kevin Durant or Kawhi Leonard, because you don't think that the games played mattered as much. I don't know, I don't necessarily know what the case was when you really dig into the metrics, even for James Harden to get in over a Damian Lillard, maybe over De'Aaron Fox, but Fox did have he had a better defensive season, that's for sure. And he had the glitzier season in many respects when you're looking at minutes played, and when you're also just looking at, I believe his scoring average was higher. So, like, you can look at those raw numbers. You could dig into some of the impact metrics. We did that when we were actually doing our All NBA teams, Grant and I. No major snubs here, though. About what would happen, because they went through the list, and LeBron and Steph and I think Dame, like, these are guys that wouldn't have qualified under the under the new rules. And I think what you're going to see happen is that there might be seasons in which lower tier players make it. I think we need to define lower tier, because if you were to put, well, I guess, Kevin Durant wouldn't be an option here, but if you were to put, or Kawhi Leonard, but if you were to put Pascal Siakam in this, does that qualify as a lower tier player? I mean, like, then Domas Sabonis on that level, I honestly don't know. But I do think when it comes to, for the most part, especially the younger guys, where maybe, LeBron just made his 19th All NBA team, he's probably not going to give a fuck. Someone like Kevin Durant might not give a fuck and didn't really have an option or say in the matter because of injuries. But even let's use a Damian Lillard. I just think All NBA means enough to these guys, especially when, for many of them, like a Jaylen Brown, like a Jason Tatum as well, it's tied to their contract and that their incentives there. They're going to continue to go for it. And maybe we'd even see Luka been like, if the Mavericks try to shut him down earlier, just dispensed with that attempt. And so I'm not too concerned about there being a lower tier of player involved. I think we need to see it play out for 2 to 3 seasons, but it's a distinct possibility. And there might be years in which it happens, but I do think it'll be, if that ever happens, and when it has happened, it will primarily be because of injuries, not because guys, they were getting shut down or load managed to the point that they weren't playing in that many games. There'll always be cases where, okay, maybe this really fucks Kawhi Leonard out of ever making an all NBA team again. But I don't think it's going to result in just like this massive exodus of the usual faces here. So yeah, that's where I land on that. Let's get into the Discord fun here. I had a bunch of good questions this week. Scrolling through them, I ran out. I didn't have my usual time to prep for these. So this is going to be more of a off the cuff thing, but that's that can be fun as well. So oh, here we go. So Carrigan asks, how do you feel? Oh boy, this is with the Knicks down 3-2 as I record this. Carrigan asks, how do you feel about the Donovan Mitchell fiasco? Now, they think they would have been better by making the trade worse. Or you're still hoping the Knicks get him eventually in free agency? I'm not looking ahead to Donovan Mitchell's free agency, which I think is in not 23 or 24 or 25. I think it's in 2025. I should double check that. So no, I'm not thinking about Donovan Mitchell's free agency. Do I think they should have done it knowing what they were this season? I don't know. And knowing how topsy-turvy RJ Barrett's year was, where it would have looked like a home run if he was sort of the primary fodder for that trade. And now he's playing well enough in the playoffs where people are going to have high expectations for him again. I'm ultimately still okay that they didn't make the move. And I think what would be most troubling is if they turn around after this postseason, because I do expect them to lose in this round to Miami at some point, even if they take it to a game 7, is if you double down on this exact core and treat yourself as, oh, we're kind of just role players away. They still need, and Grant and I talked about this, like they still need a best player in a playoff series type of guy. Jalen Brunson can be that sometimes for a game, but over the course of a longer stretch, as great as he is, he's just going to be better than your number 2. And could Donovan Mitchell technically be that player? Sure. I don't know if it changes the dynamic of the team at all, where yes, quickly before he gets injured, not great in the playoffs, but he finishes runner up in 6th man of the year voting, has that type of a breakout. What does getting Donovan Mitchell do to his Quentin Grimes even still on the team? And he's become an important part. Are you as likely to have then go out and trade a Josh Hart after that? It's just really tough to know whether the Knicks should regret like the asking price there. I don't think Donovan Mitchell though would have made them much more menacing, if at all. Like their ceiling to me still would have been, okay, they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. I'm not going to pick them to beat Philly or Boston. And I think you could argue that maybe the defense would be less equipped because maybe you wouldn't have Grimes or Barrett as part of that Donovan Mitchell trade. And how would that have served you against the Cleveland Cavaliers team? Would you have made other moves to where you don't wait out the Josh Hart market and think about how important he was? It's just, and then what does it look like for Julius Randle, who gets nudged down another rung in the pecking order? Whereas right now he can be the 1 or the 2, depending on, Brunson distributes, but I think he takes over games. He knows when he needs to. Julius Randle all of a sudden becomes just like the 3rd guy or the 2nd guy, where he's vacillating between there, where there's no path to him really being a clear number 1 unless he's playing with bench heavy units. That probably doesn't look like a great role for him. We know what can happen when you get him moving downhill, and we know that he can hit pick and pops, but just he needs to be on the ball, I think, for him to have any sort of overarching engagement, especially on defense, which he often does not anyway. I don't know if they're better off. I wouldn't say they're worse off either, but I do think that this season kind of underscores, it was a Cinderella campaign in many ways. You still need that best player in a playoff series type of cornerstone, and they quite frankly don't have it. And if it were me, and we'll get into this deeper in the offseason, I would look at moving Julius Randle and going from there. It doesn't have to be for a star, but to open things up for the development of other guys and other types of lineups, smaller lineups. But also just to kind of clear the deck if you're actually invested in RJ. And if you're not going to do that, then you need to go on the trade market and use what assets you have, which are plenty right now, to acquire one of the marquee names that becomes available. I don't know who will be there. Maybe Jaylen Brown's on the market if he turns down a Supermax extension. We have a question related to that in a little bit. But yeah, I don't feel any worse about, and I felt pretty good about them not making the trade, even if it was sort of accidental, where you would like them to say, no, that cost was too high, we're just not going to do it. It just sort of seems like the Jazz said, fuck this, and phased them out because the Knicks thought they had more leverage than they actually did. But I don't think Mitchell would have turned them into more of a threat to come out of the East this season. Would he have given them a clearer pathway? Maybe, as that singular player, but he would have definitely bankrupted your asset well, to the point where it's, well, how long until we can then afford to trade for this next star. That might be a dilemma they run into whenever. But does Jalen Brunson have as good a season if he's playing next to Donovan Mitchell instead of Julius Randle and RJ Barrett? I don't. And obviously this crew. I honestly don't know, but I'm more interested in seeing what the Knicks are going to do this offseason. And I think that they just need to be careful not to double down on what's just sort of this mediocre, not mediocre model. They're clearly better than mediocre, but just not double down on, okay, this is a team that can win a playoff round, but are they really ever going to contend for a title as currently constructed? The answer to that is no. Next question comes from Cyborgian. If you, Grant, and Jesus played MJ and the Devil in a pickup game, who would win? Whoever has me and Grant on the team. I think that's pretty obvious. Grant, I just feel like he's tall, so I just feel like he's going to be super good at basketball. At hoops, I'm not good, but I have a lefty hook shot, and I would think that that'd be enough to beat Jordan and the Devil, who I didn't know hooped at all. Next question comes from unbiased Pistons fan. This one's wild. What's the trade package for the number one pick this year? All the Thunder's picks, all the Pelicans picks. What's the biggest package you could see being or offered up? And this is kind of a repeat of a question that we already had about would you give up how many picks would the Thunder specifically need to give up uh, to get the number one pick from whoever has it this year, assuming it's not them, since they will be in the lottery. Excuse me, it's like 5:30 a.m. here. I'm exhausted. I I don't know what the offer is. I think the most tantalizing one would include an actual player, where it's depending on which team wins it, is what if the Mavericks just decided to rebuild and they offered you Luka for Victor Wembanyama? Or what if the Bucks decided to just go wholesale pivot and they offered you Giannis? I think that's where things would get interesting. When you're looking at actual picks, I don't fucking know. If the Thunder said we'll give you 10 unprotected first round, we'll give you 10 of like we have this mishmash of Clippers first rounders and Rockets first rounders, and we'll give you, as many unprotected first rounds of our own as we can. Let's say 4, so the total's like 7 or 8 unprotected first rounders. Do I think the team that's going to draft Wembanyama considers it? Probably not. I'm not gonna lie. But that would be. I mean, maybe they do. It's just so many picks. I ultimately don't think they would offer it, but assuming they did, I believe whichever team wins the lottery probably says no. And I'm trying to think of the team that could win the lottery and then maybe say yes. That's just sort of on a more gradual timeline and would rather have those bites at the apple. I guess Utah, Danny Ainge would certainly be the guy to do that, but you already have so many picks of your own. Like how many more do you actually need? So I can't even think of a team that would win the lottery and prioritize a haul. It would have to be something insane where it's all those draft picks plus is Shea there? And the answer to that would be no, because it defeats the purpose for the Thunder. Next question, Cosmic Raccoon. Should the Bucks do a restructure this offseason around Giannis in order to assemble a younger supporting cast? I feel like the Bucks are drifting towards an iceberg by locking into a supporting cast that is older than Giannis and instead of decline around him. If they lock onto this path, he'll definitely leave in a couple of years. But if they trade Drew, maybe sign and trade Lopez, don't lock into Middleton, get younger and aim to have max cap space next offseason, maybe they can create a new younger supporting cast around Giannis. I do think that this is kind of a fascinating dilemma that the Bucks have, or a fascinating scenario. I ultimately don't think it's what the Bucks do, because one, they're so draft pick poor right now. You become very reliant on free agency. And I don't know, given what's going to happen in the new CBA, whether the machinations are in place for you to actually improve your team a great deal through that route. One, Milwaukee's never been this hot button destination, even since Giannis has been there. You could argue that, okay, well, have they ever been a max cap space team? That's all fair. But the best way to improve your roster or to change it up would probably be, okay, well, can you get enough high-end draft equity out of Drew and a Brook Lopez sign and trade, and maybe the same thing with Middleton, to restack your deck and make another mega trade when it, in a year or two, in addition, when you have your cap space or whatever as well. I don't know. It's certainly worth discussing. Brook Lopez is going to be 35 next year. We know Chris Middleton's getting up there in years. He didn't look the same defensively when he came back from yeah, basically it felt like a litany of injuries. But when he came back from the second injury or second return, whatever you want to call it, maybe it's different if you think that, okay, let's say you're angling to have this space in 2024. Like, do you know, like, who is the or do you know Jaylen Brown's gonna be a free agent? Did he turn down that max extension? Who else are you trying to go after there? It's not really just like this well of great uh free agents at that point. You're looking at, oh, Clay Thompson, who's just going to be, I think it would be age 34 at that point. Pascal Siakam, he'd be interesting, but definitely a questionable fit next to Giannis. If you're then asking Giannis to, well, you have to trust us and punt on 2 more years, and then we're going to go after like Paul George or Kawhi Leonard or Anthony Davis, like those guys just aren't going to be super young at that point either. LeBron will be 40. When you think Kawhi will be 34, Paul George will be 35. Anthony Davis will be he'll be over 32 at that point. Um, so Brandon Ingram, okay. But you're going to wait out for Brandon Ingram for 2 years. I don't think you can explore that scenario unless the offers for all of those guys are just so can't miss to where you're really restocking your draft well, not to necessarily use those picks and then hit on them, but can you have enough assets to then turn around and make another star type trade? If the whole goal is to bide your time for when Luka becomes a free agent, if you really need cap space and someone's willing to come to Milwaukee, you can just figure out a way to create cap space um at that time, no matter how much you need. Like, you can always just figure out a way. Now, what is an issue, and I would recognize, is the Bucks as of now, if they're going to keep all these guys, like they're going to hit I'll say in all likelihood that second apron, or that basically, what second apron or hard cap masquerading as a second apron, to where they are going to be very limited in what they can do in trades. They can't trade a draft pick 7 years out, so they would only be able to trade their 2029 first, but that would have been whatever anyway. They're not going to be able to use their mini mid-level exception until you get into the scenario of, well, then we're just obligated to pay Ingles and Jay Crowder because we can. And you have your one draft pick, Marjon Beauchamp, and then salary offer that you can dangle and hope that gets you someone in a trade. So you're already like, no, forget, you can't acquire anyone and sign and trade. That's just not happening for you. You're not going to be able to spend, to not even be able to sign, or you will be able to sign free agents to the minimum, but you're going to be rolling the dice. And it's, oh, did Josh Okogie's value plummet or Torrey Craig's value plummet in the Phoenix Sun series to where maybe they would come on board? I don't know. But I think this is a great question, Cosmic Raccoon. I just can't. If I were to say should the Bucks redo, I'm just going to say no. If anything, I would kind of look at it as, you need to just make this one last run, and if you show that you're on the verge of something, or you at least put yourself in position to where, okay, we brought these guys back, but all these deals are movable, or at least, oh, we got far enough into the playoffs where Giannis knows that we're, like, serious, and that we'll be able to rebuild on the fly because we've conserved our assets when these guys are older and coming off the books. I think what they actually should do, well, let me frame it this way, because I'm all over the place with this question. It's so tough to wrap my head around. I don't think they should do it, because what precious time you have with Giannis now, unless he's going to sign his own extension, if he does that, then it's a whole different story. And it's all right. We can play the longer game. But if he's going to have actual free agency looming over, I don't think you can afford to take a step back even for 1 year. I don't know what they do this offseason specifically. I'd probably hawk around their best trade package that they could. If you really wanted to look at it, could you see, is it worth changing things up by dangling Jrue Holiday, see what you can get for him? I just don't think you're going to get a reasonable enough upgrade. You don't have enough assets to attach to Jrue Holiday, for instance, to go and get Jaylen Brown, if that's somebody that ends up being on the market. So I don't know. There's no easy answer, but I think you are obligated to bring this core back within reason. If Middleton's going to get a max salary of $40+ million from the Houston Rockets, yeah, then you need to take a step back and say, okay, what are we doing here? Or unless the offers are just so over the top, and I just don't know what teams are going to come in and be like, we need Jrue Holiday, so we're going to give you 3 first rounders. They're all going to be unprotected or something with him. You're obligated, and it's more important to me, in my opinion, to capitalize on Giannis's window. Next question comes from Glad. This was a good one. I did look at this one and did some cursory research on it. So I don't know how the math would work, but how it would be intended. But should there be some sort of stipulation that if teams have the number one pick overall, say in the last 3 years, they shouldn't be allowed to be there again in the following years? So like teams like the Pistons, Magic, and T-Wolves wouldn't be eligible for the number one pick this year. You could expand it to the top three if you wanted, but that makes things a little too complicated. It just feels like the same few teams have been in the top three the last few years. Shout out Houston Rockets in terms of who have had the. I'm adding the shout out Houston Rockets in terms of who had the best odds, and it kind of feels weird / unfair that they had chances to grab the best players available and have done nothing with them. Oh, cough Rockets. I didn't read the end of this, apparently. I would call it the Pistons, but at least they can blame injuries. Also, I will acknowledge that the new system typically has been good. I'm not rewarding the worst teams perfectly with the best draft picks. So there is a version of this where it was like the NBA draft lottery wheel, and it was essentially scheduled out to where you would know who had these. It wasn't even a lottery anymore. It was the wheel. And it was proposed by Mike Zarin. He was at the time, he was the like general manager of the Celtics, but you would essentially know where you're picking years in advance and whether you're picking number one. And the idea would be to schedule your rebuild around that. And he's now the VP of Celtics. I was just Googling that. I didn't know that he had been elevated to VP of basketball operations and team council. I know where people are for the most part, although I got tripped up on Sam Quinn during a radio hit today. I just totally spaced on where he was at the moment. But the titles are just getting so hard to keep track of. I gotta say, and in case anyone's like actually upset, I apologize that I couldn't remember what the title was for Mike Zarin in Boston. Anyhow, the wheel, I was never a fan of it because I don't think you can plan rebuilds, and injury could throw your season entirely off. And I still like the element of randomness. This proposal is probably a little bit different, and I've seen stuff written that's similar to it. I'm ultimately against it because I don't know. Yeah, there's a team like the Rockets have mismanaged their assets, but let's say the Spurs are bottom three team again next year. Is that because that they failed, or are they just early on in their rebuild and they're going through the real motions? And I just feel like the Rockets are sort of an extreme example. First of all, we don't even know if they're going to pick in the top three this year. They technically could still fall out of it, but the Rockets feel like just sort of this extreme example. But if you wanted to create another element of randomness, given how important it is for small markets to get players through the draft now, and look, how important it is for teams to just get players to the drafts in general, because free agency is just becoming increasingly irrelevant. And I don't think that's going to change. If anything, it worsens with the new CBA. So I don't know that you can tell teams, okay, you're going to get, if you have one top three pick, and what if it's really not your fault? What if that top three pick gets injured and now you've derailed another season, but you don't have the trade-off? Like, think about OKC with Chet Holmgren this year as an example. You get Chet Holmgren at number 2. And now let's just say, okay, we can't be in the top 3 for X amount of years. He gets injured, but you don't already have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in place. Now, they did game the system to get there based off how they shut down Shai Gilgeous-Alexander last season. But I think the new system has been mostly fine as is, and I'd be mostly against it. Maybe if you want to go, okay, a third time. So in this case, Houston, you were in the top 3. Could we make it sort of just like how we handle the repeater tax clock, just in a different variation, and say, oh, you've been in the top 3 in 2 of the last 3 years. Oh, you can't be in the top 3 again this year. That would be something that'd be interesting. It would definitely add another wrinkle. I just don't know then, how do you determine what do your odds get bounced down to? How do you determine where you actually fall in that? Is it like you can't automatically throw them to the bottom? That'd be fucked up. You can't automatically just have them flop places with, 4th place, let's say, if you have the 3rd worst record, which I think Houston did this year. But I'd be interested to see what that model would actually look like, and how, is it just, okay, if you've been in the top 3 in 2 of the last 3 years, your lottery odds get slashed in half, and those extra ping pong balls get divvied up evenly amongst all the other teams in the lottery. I don't know. Interesting question, and it wouldn't shock me if we have more lottery reform in the future. I just don't necessarily think that that there would be a need for that right now, especially again because of how irrelevant free agency has become and how important draft picks are to either one, develop or use in those star trades that teams are ultimately looking for. Next question comes from Herb Jones Enjoyer. What does Herb Jones need to do to get some respect? They are referring, of course, to the fact that Herb Jones did not make an all defensive team. Uh, my response here would be this shit's hard. And speaking of all defense, all rookie, I will very quickly just say that I was surprised Andrew Nemhard didn't make an all rookie team. I thought he probably should have been in there over most people would have said Jeremy Sohan. I think I had him in, and was it over Jalen Duren, or did I put Jalen Duren on there? And I bought no, I didn't have Jabari Smith Jr. on mine. I don't think one of those two players should have been bounced for Andrew Nemhard. And I was kind of I thought that maybe Christian Brown would get more love than he actually did, but his role was just so bit with Denver. I kind of understand it. But for the all defense, for Herb Jones specifically, what does he need to do to get some defensive respect? Probably needs to be viewed as a forward more. And I guess that doesn't matter because positions are getting just thrown out. And Herb Jones, enjoyer, Pelicans were the only top 10 defense without a player receiving the first place vote. I didn't investigate this, but I do think that tracks. The Pelicans were sixth in points allowed per possession per cleaning the glass. And just looking at the distribution of everything else. And I know how Herb Jones got cannibalized and I guess being a guard this year probably helped him being eligible there. Just when you look at how many bigs are involved, and like first team alone, you had Brook Lopez, Evan Mobley, and Jaren Jackson Jr. I think that threw everything for a whirl. And then you go to the second team, had two bigs, and Draymond Green and Bam Adebayo. I probably would have had Herb over Dylan Brooks. I also had Lou Dort on my team and Jaden McDaniels. I think that wings and guards specifically are more liable to get screwed now, because it does feel like people recognize bigs the most for defense since they value rim protection so much, which is ultimately fine. You're going to get rid of positions now. And I think guards will suffer more than anyone, where I think if you look at this year, does Alex Caruso and Drew Holiday, do they both crack in all I would argue at least Dylan Brooks, Derek White, Drew Holiday, and Alex Caruso. Of those four guards, probably two of them wouldn't have made it if we just opened this up to, positionless, and you're more comfortable, then you can include Giannis and Jaden McDaniels being, viewed among voters predominantly as a forward. I don't know if he was eligible at guard. So I think Herb Jones gets plenty of respect. I don't actually would I have put him in over Dylan Brooks? Yes. Anyone else on second team? I honestly don't know. OG? No. Derek White? No. I guess your quibbles would have to be, and there's no one on the first team I would have put him in front of. This might have been my exact first team. I can't remember. I had Evan Mobley, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Brook Lopez. I think I had Drew Holiday. Alex Caruso might have been on my second team. I don't really know how I worked that, but I just don't view this shit's hard. And I think it's okay to be like, okay, if he wasn't even given any consideration and he ended up being behind Jimmy Butler, Mikal Bridges, and Marcus Smart, that's like, in the guard section, I think you can make the case, did Lou Dort, him being so far behind Herb Jones and Mikal Bridges and Marcus Smart, the voting section, this shit's hard. I think Herb Jones gets plenty of respect as a defensive player, though, and I don't think there are definitely flaws in the voting, and I don't think I had him on my all. He might have been on my third teams. I really should have pulled that up. I don't think I had him on one of them. Some people could have looked at minutes, but we know Alex Caruso logged a few. Looking at guards specifically, he logged plenty of fewer minutes than Herb Jones. Jones takes on some of the toughest assignments. He's fantastic. I don't know what he needs to do to get more recognition. I don't know that he deserves, that needs it, I should say. I just don't think it was an egregious whiff. When you look at the All NBA, All Defense, and All Rookie teams this year, I think that they were all pretty strong. You can take issue with some of the whole Mark Jackson leaving Nikola Jokic off his MVP ballot entirely, but I don't view this as just. There were some surprises. I'll say Jaylen Brown making second team, for instance. But nothing that stands out to me is, this is unacceptable. I just think some years it breaks right for you, and some years it's not. And look, Herb Jones is, I think, the other thing here. When you look at Herb Jones and Jaden McDaniels, fair or not, they just don't get as much. For Evan Mobley to make first team as young as he is impressive, because I think people give benefit of the doubt to guys who have been in the league a little bit longer. And so if Herb Jones turns in this same season, but it's year 4 instead of year 2, does that make a difference? Maybe. Next question comes from this is Drizzy Watts asks, does this series with the Celtics prove that Tyrese Maxey has a ceiling? And where does he, as I click out this window before finishing reading the question, does this Celtics series show that there's a ceiling on who Maxey can be on a playoff contender, or is this just a result of a bad matchup and still room to go as a player, decision making, playmaking wise? This question was, I should note, asked before Tyrese Maxey went off in game 5 that the Sixers won, and then he had a pretty strong, not as efficient game 6. I do think there are definitely areas I think this playoff series has identified that he needs to improve. When you look at just his takeoff points around the basket specifically, he's not shooting well in the restricted area. And then I do think there's, I'm not ready to pass judgment on his playmaking just because I don't think the Sixers have him doing enough of it. They want him to just be the speedster on the ball. If he needs to run a slowed down offense, though, that's something that I think he's going to need to improve. Part of that would be being more unpredictable from the in between range, or maybe leaning on or developing the step back or pull up jumper a little bit more. Part of this is now his role. He just definitely hadn't had a chance to develop in this capacity over the past year and a half since the James Harden trade. Still, can he become more of a mid-range player? He's 1 of 7 on step backs in the Celtics series. I do think nothing about this series is discouraging for me. The Celtics are uniquely built to hassle him, and I'd say he's probably been better defensively for stretches than I would expect. In game 6, the Celtics would go out of their way to, if they had got Maxey switched on their ball handler, they would then go seek out a second ball screen to try and get James Harden involved in the action rather than him. And so, that's kind of a win for him, but I still think Tyrese Maxey's ceiling with the Sixers is just so much different than Tyrese Maxey's ceiling on a team that wouldn't have James Harden and Joel Embiid, because he would be allowed to do more and develop in different ways. I don't think this is necessarily good or bad for his career, but I still think in this exact role that he's in, yeah, there are limitations. You'd like to see him improve. Will he have the on-ball reps too? Broaden his horizons? I don't know. This is still someone who could make an all-star team as like the Sixers' third best player. And so I'm not worried about, it's not just these last 2 games. I just really think that um I just think that he's still super young and he's going to be fine. His extension is going to be interesting though, because I bet that his agent is looking at uh Jordan Poole's extension, 123 million guaranteed, and looking at the season that Maxey just had, they're probably going to say, oh, he needs to be maxed or close. Give Tyrese the Maxey, we'll call it. So I'm fascinated to see that. But I do think the Celtics, because you look at how small Maxey can be, and he's already a kind of a disadvantage going to the basket. Their length there can really, especially of their wings and guards, can really disrupt him in ways that I don't think would be as pronounced of an issue against other teams. Next question comes from Jake from State Farm. So with the Suns' lack of depth, is there a trade for CP3 or Ayton that they could do that could net them something? And I'm sure there's a trade that could net them something. And we'll go into more detail. I'd rather have Grant on for the bulk of this discussion. I do think what I will say after this playoff flame out, there are 2 things that I'm going to say. I'm not ready to declare the Kevin Durant trade a failure. It's worth having a discussion because of how well Bridges played in with Brooklyn. I don't know if his role ever would have, I don't think his role in Phoenix ever would have looked the same unless they moved CP3 this summer. So after a trade like that, there needs to be time to let your supporting cast be fleshed out and just to figure it out, especially when it's happening mid-season. It's not like they have the offseason and then a training camp to kind of futz and fiddle and plan around this. This happened midstream. It was their choice, but it always was probably going to be the case that, yes, they're on this urgent timeline and it needed to be about this season, but it's more so about shoring things up for the bigger picture. And to that end, yeah, you have to look at moving Ayton. But as I asked Grant, is he more valuable? Jordan Poole, 4 years and 123 million guaranteed, or DeAndre Ayton at 3 years and 102? Just because the number's cheaper? Is it DeAndre Ayton? I think Jordan Poole plays or represents a concept that is more desirable as someone who can operate from as an advantage creator. But let's just look, you have DeAndre Ayton. They're definitely going to look to move him. We'll see what the market is. CB3 has 15 million guaranteed, 15.8 million guaranteed this summer. They could simply waive him and stretch that out over 3 years, which I think so that's, 5 and change a year for a little bit. You could also try and send him to a team that has cap space and then they can stretch and waive him. I don't know what the compensation is to eat 15, like to eat that much money. And so, or you could hope that, all right, can we use him as like salary ballast in another trade? You just don't have the requisite assets to do to do that, to, like, use CP3's full salary, and to, like, that's gonna be an anchor unless you're taking back a truly, like, bad deal. I mean, like, I don't so, the CP3 thing is tough. If I had to guess, I think he's probably more likely to be waived than traded just because that number is so big. Maybe I'm wrong there. Ayton is more fascinating. I had thought if things kind of not implode in Boston, but they don't make the conference finals, would they want to give a chance to Ayton, and would they build something around Derek White or Malcolm Brogdon? And then you could give Al Horford or Robert Williams III. That ultimately feels like it's giving up way too much on Boston's end because of the season Ayton just had. The Dallas Maverick stuff probably won't go away if Kyrie Irving's looking to leave. I think that'd be a terrible idea for Phoenix. But they can be, if you get rid of Chris Paul, you can operate within the hard cap. And then there's like a scarcity of other teams that need bigs. I don't think Indiana would trade Miles Turner for DeAndre Ayton straight up right now, and that would underscore a huge part of the issue. OKC's gonna have a boatload of cap space. I don't think you're looking to unload Ayton into cap space unless again you have some sort of sign and trade scenario cocked up, where maybe that's where CP3 becomes valuable in. But, would they take a flyer on him? I think they would, but would they give you Lou Dort for DeAndre Ayton? I don't even think you would have to give up other stuff in that deal as well. Would Portland talk about Jeremy Grant sign and trade talks? Uh, Maybe, but they would, I think, have to be skewing towards a rebuild, and I don't think they do that with Damian Lillard there. And then even if you're gonna accept Ayton, you have to find another taker for Nurkic. You just can't pay like $50 million a year to Ayton and Nurkic to be on your team. That would be that would just be disgusting. Just the Spurs look at him, they'll have cap space, but are they gonna build? You're not getting Vassell or Sowen or this year's pick. Could you get Keldon Johnson? I mean, maybe that could be something to look at. Those are the types of trades you're probably looking at now at this point. And I can try and come up with more specific ones for Grant. The CP3 question is a little bit more complicated to me, just because you don't have the other assets to sweeten his deal, and so it's just kind of easier. Oh, we'll eat the 5 point whatever million dollars, 5.2, $5.3 million per year, just to get his salary off, and that's going to give you more flexibility, and ensures that you can use your entire mid-level exception. But that's going to have to be the machinations to which they improve this thing. I think 1 and 2 is assuming they don't find a way to add just like a monster amount of salary. I think next season, if they keep CP3, they should still have they'll still have access to their entire mid-level exception. That's going to be the primary tool for them to improve their team with, and then a DeAndre Ayton trade. And at this point, I don't think you've reached the stage where it's, oh, can we just offload him in a cap space? I'm sure you could. You can't go that route because he's still too important to your team, even if you think you can approximate his value in new deals for Bismack Biyombo and Jock Landale. We kind of saw it in Game 6 against the Nuggets, where Jokic wasn't slowed down at all. I think Ayton provided him more resistance, and that we sometimes take just his size and default strength. Not like he plays with extra oomph, but just that default strength. It's probably taken for granted a little bit. I'd be curious to see what his trade value is, but the best way I could frame it, if I were Indy right now, I'm not doing Miles Turner for DeAndre Ayton straight up. And if you're Indy, you don't really have bad contracts to send out. You could look at like Buddy Hield is going to be expiring, so Miles Turner and Buddy Hield for Ayton plus salary X, that doesn't really do it for you. And maybe there's something else you can do on a smaller scale. Landry Shamet makes 10.3 million. Cameron Payne is at 6.5 million guarantee. If you want to take on a longer term contract, or you need to stack together salaries in a sign and trade, I still think we're looking at mini MLE, and then what can we just get for Ayton? Because the only thing you can really attach to him is swaps at this point. I think they're going to look at it. I would brace anyone who's not yet. You need to absolutely 100% brace yourself for the DeAndre Ayton trade rumors and speculation, because it's coming if it's not, in fact, here already. Next question comes from Muckle. Not really a serious question, but how fun have these playoffs been? Even with my team, the Cavs, getting embarrassed in round 1, I've generally enjoyed these playoffs. Unpredictable outcomes, elite play performances, very few 4 or 5 game series. This has been a really fun ride so far. Yeah, I would agree. I've enjoyed the variability element of it, or the unpredictability, the ambiguity, not having that sense of inevitability that we've had in years past. I think, and we actually have, so I'll skip ahead to this question from Darkwing Duck and loop these together. They said, I was listening to the local Chuckle Nuts on the radio on the way to work, saying it's been one of the better playoffs they've seen from a playing and drama standpoint. For whatever reason, I haven't felt compelled to watch any of it, which is why I asked the offensive trends question in the previous bag. Is that the sense from in here that the playoffs have been super compelling to watch? I would say yes, they've been compelling. There's been some stinkers of games, and I think some people will view the absence as just like a true juggernaut, even though I think the Nuggets are making their case to be one of those as an indictment on the state of the league. This is by design. This is, or it's increasingly becoming by design. Woj came out and said that the NBA is looking increasingly to make sure that third star doesn't line up in this new CBA on this. Like there won't be a team with a third star. They want that team with a third star to have to let him walk or send him elsewhere. And this is just an extension of that thinking because we don't know who's going to win the title for the first time and how long. And even if you are just disappointed about what happened to the Bucks, yeah, I think they were probably the safest title pick, even though Denver made a case for it as well. Them losing, especially under the circumstances of injuries, uh, is totally believable, and I think they seem to beatable even beforehand. I don't know. I would wonder why someone who is a fan of the NBA wouldn't find these playoffs compelling. If you're a fan of a team and your team, Darkwing Duck, I believe you're a Jazz fan, unless I'm wrong. You're the Jazz are out of it. So you're just, maybe you've tuned into draft mode or you're in off-season mode. I would totally understand that. If you like NBA at large, I don't know why you wouldn't enjoy these playoffs where there's been a lot of just stratagems that have been employed that are interesting when you look at all the wrinkles that teams are throwing in and then upsets galore. I guess you could be turned off by what feels like a huge breadth of injuries where, the Clippers finished their series with the Suns with no Kawhi or Paul George. And then the Suns finished their series against the Nuggets with Ayton and CP3 sitting out. There it feels like there's been more of that. Julius Randle missing a game, Jimmy Butler missing a game, Giannis Antetokounmpo missing 2 games. There and then the injuries, Tyler Hero, Victor Oladipo, they're out. It does feel just anecdotally that there have been more injuries, but we're witnessing just so much like Joel Embiid and James Harden. Like this, they're on the verge of making it to the conference finals, and the implications here of what happens to the Celtics if they don't make the conference finals, what happens to the Sixers if they don't, because James Harden can be a free agent. There's the Houston bugaboo out there, and then there's the Nuggets where there's Nikola Jokic. To me, I believe did not win his third MVP award because of, I don't know if you want to call it fatigue. That's an insult to what Joel Embiid did, but I think a lot of it was his team won 2 playoff rounds last year. I don't think anyone would have had a problem voting him MVP a third time, but he didn't have like any real supporting cast. Now you've given him a different supporting cast, a healthier supporting cast. Look what the Nuggets are doing. Are they the title favorites? The Warriors are on the brink of elimination against a Lakers team that was written off earlier in the year and somehow made it to the second round. I get some people might be discouraged by, to see, let's look at the West, a 7 seed beating a 2 seed in Memphis, which by the way was missing important players themselves, most notably in Steven Adams for the Grizzlies, and then the Warriors upsetting the 3 seed. But like the upset is relative. When you look at all these upsets that have actually happened, the most surprising one in the first round was probably the Knicks just trucking the Cavaliers in 5 games, to be honest with you. So I found the playoffs super compelling because they are so unpredictable. I've gotten so many things wrong. And I do feel like a lot of things are changing from game to game, where even the Warriors feel like they've been quicker to react or make changes than they normally would have. And you're dealing with that as well. Just this sense of finality with the Warriors. What's going to happen? Draymond's a free agent. Jordan Poole has not been great all of a sudden. If they fall short, are they going to look at making wholesale changes? And just what are the Lakers going to do? Yeah, they've been much improved. Anthony Davis is playing spectacularly when healthy. He does seem like he's going to play in Game 6, by the way. So I'm happy he avoided concussion protocols, or more importantly, that he avoided having a concussion. I'd be curious to know, to throw it back at anyone who is not in. Excuse me, for anyone who has not enjoyed the playoffs, I would like to know the reason why. And I would totally listen to it. I would just be curious, aside from injuries or your team being out of it, why you wouldn't have enjoyed these playoffs. Valid question though. I don't have any issues with it being asked. Next question comes from Rome 8180 asks, What should the Celtics do with their front line going forward? Horford's been so integral to both their defense and offense, but he's 36. Robert Williams is a great player, but he's averaged around 42 games per season since getting into the league 5 years ago. So given that Horford may start to see a decline in effectiveness, Williams may only be available half the season in any given year, and the new CBA plus ballooning contracts for their stars, limiting Boston's flexibility. What's the best thing they can do to maintain a contention level front court? So this is like this is a question that I mean, it should matter. This is a question that fucking matters. Is the best way that I can frame this, because everything that Rome 8180 here lays out is spot on. And I think what does help is that Al Horford's all of a sudden on the books for $10 million a year next season. I would push back against Robert Williams III being this great player, and it's not just for me. It's not just about the availability. It's he looks. I don't know if he's still injured, but like he's looked slower on defense this year, maybe a little bit more or not as impactful on offense or more discombobulated in general. They're both cheap enough to where it's okay. We can move forward. And by the way, also complicating this, I know he hasn't been used in super high volume during the playoffs. Grant Williams is going to enter restricted free agency. And so that compromises their front court even further. And as Rome 8180 alluded to, Jaylen Brown is eligible for a 5-year, $295 million extension this year. Jason Tatum's at 5 years, 318, I believe, or whatever it is. That's like in total, when all the years are together, that's a lot of money. And we know how restrictive that the new CBA is going to be when you're looking at teams that hit that. I'm just going to call it fucking hard cap. To forget the second apron. It's the hard cap. Um, I don't. It's not an imminent concern, by the way, because you're looking at those extensions kicking in a little ways down the line for each of them. But I do think we first need to see how this postseason ends. But you need to look at, okay, is there anything we can do to diversify this front court? And we know that they want, ideally, you would have someone who can give the rim pressure that Robert Williams III gives you, but also gives you the switchability or perimeter, who Al Horford, who can still hang, and then maybe also just kind of the help rim protection of Robert Williams III, while also the floor spacing of Al Horford. There's no guy in the league that provides that. Who would even be the closest I guess it's Miles Turner. You're just not going to. Miles Turner is probably the closest you come to that. You're not going to be able to. I mean, you could. I mean, maybe you could get him actually, just because if the Pacers want to trade him, you couldn't. You can technically trade some future first round picks there. I think you look at it, and it's not a matter of we need to cut costs here. Like Robert Williams III and Al Horford aren't going to be mega expensive. It's we need to make the most of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum before we get hamstrung by all these salary cap limitations. And is that going to lead them to look for more drastic changes over the offseason? I can't even think, aside from Miles Turner, I can't even think of names. And he's not the perfect Celtics big, by the way, because they're going to want someone who provides a little bit more rim pressure. It's probably he showed that he was more dynamic on offense this year, but Robert Williams III and Al Horford are both better playmakers than him. I'm just saying his name is kind of a point of that would be a guy that you could theoretically target. I don't know what else or who else you look at. There are cheaper options that you can look to approximate on the center market where it's, we just want a third body in there. So we're going to go after Bismack Biyombo. And do we get him for the minimum at this point? Like, is he still going to be on a minimum contract, or is this someone who technically requires a use of the mini mid level, in which case things get complicated? You're not going to get Brook Lopez. You just won't have the money unless he thinks that he can go ring chasing. And then the center market, I mean, the whole free agency market's like sort of kind of bleak. Like, do you really want Naz Reid would be interesting, but you're not going to have the money to get him. Vooch, no, you're not going to have the money to get him. Christian Wood, no. So you would be looking at more, if you're going to upgrade the front court, I don't know, you're going to be looking more at trades. That's why I mentioned him as a Deandre Ayton destination. He just doesn't space the floor enough but that would be like an interesting challenge trade I guess it would be Horford and Derek White or Malcolm Brogdon would be the framework of the package. But then you just have like Ayton, who might be more equipped to be kind of at times the actual defensive anchor, where Robert Williams III is going to do more disrupt stuff as the secondary guy. But his offensive lows and disappearing acts are just so stark. I don't know that you could just like having both those guys on the roster without then having also a floor stretching big there with you. I don't know what big men are going to be on the trade market this year. Is Joel Embiid get there, depending on how the Sixers season ends? I don't know. The Boston does have cards that it could play, though, and I just don't know. if Kristaps Porzingis all of a sudden became gettable in a sign and trade scenario, or I guess if he just opted in and stayed on that deal, do you look at that? But then you're really tying yourself to oh, another sort of injury prone guy. Not that well, yeah, Robert Williams III is injury prone himself. I know Porzingis was available this year, but that was the first time in roughly forever. Wendell Carter Jr. would be great for this team, but what does it take to get him out of Orlando? It probably depends on who they're drafting in the lottery. And even then, if they're going to get Wembanyama, they're going to be fine playing Banchero, Wendell Carter Jr., Wembanyama, and Franz Wagner together. They're not even going to think twice about that. I don't think they need a Mitchell Robinson if the Knicks decided to make him available. Could they maybe get an Isaiah Hartenstein? I think that might be the scale of move they're more likely to look at. Could I see them being interested in Jonas Valanciunas? I just don't know. Unless you're sending Derek White out as part of that, which why would you do for Valanciunas? I don't know why New Orleans would necessarily be interested. But I do think that we could see, especially if their season ends before the conference finals, or if they just flame out in the conference finals. Rome 8180 is absolutely right here that this is like that we could see some pretty big ass changes from the Celtics where everyone's looking towards the Jaylen Brown crossroads. And look, it's there. If he says no to the Supermax extension and they're offering it, yeah, he's going to start being shopped. But I think I said this, I was asked about it. Well, I was also asked if the Celtics were going to get rid of Joe Mazzulla after the season, should they lose the series to the Sixers. That was another, we talked about this in the show, Grant and I, if anyone listened, how you can get caught off guard by questions on the radio. And that was just one of them where I was like, oh, I know that uh, I know that some of these questions I'm not going to be ready for, but and that coaches get fired all the time. But I was taken aback by, that was just a question. So I was stumbling through that, but I was also talking about the front court specifically, where it's if they, and by the way, they did extend Missoula in what was it, February? So to get rid of him there would have been now would be weird. I know that some teams don't care about timing left on the deal, but to extend him, the terms weren't disclosed, and I don't know them yet, and then get rid of him would be bizarre / wild / not the greatest look. You have to change. You make the finals in 2022, but then you still change coaches in consecutive following off seasons would be fairly hysterical, actually. But I did mention that the front line is kind of okay, we know what we have in the perimeter if we want to keep Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum together. And I saw JJ Redick brought this up talking to Nekias Duncan and Steve Jones about, is there a cap on how you can operate with those two? Because there's a Kawhi / Paul George element to them, and yet Jaylen Brown just isn't as good of a passer as either of those two. Jason Tatum is probably up to snuff. It could be, but then you're kind of looking at, well, then do they also need point of attack help here as well? Because Marcus Smart is probably I don't know if he's their best. He's probably their best passer. Is that enough? Like, is he the pick and roll orchestrator or half court orchestrator that you want to trust to steward your offense? And if you think that you need someone to do that, is that an indictment on the Tatum Brown tandem? I think that ultimately you're set, that you probably have bodies to spare there. And I think Marcus Smart said something, I can't remember the exact quote, where it kind of felt that he was acknowledging the mortality of this roster if they didn't get it done this year. But because you have White and Brogdon and Smart, there's margin to be like, hey, we'll trade one of those guys for somebody. I just don't know who that somebody is. Again, I threw some names out there, many of which would interest me. I still like Miles Turner for the Celtics. I don't really know how much that hurts, or to frame it, doesn't help their rebounding. But still, I'd also thought the Cavs really needed perimeter players. They're like something to the thing of Jared Allen for Al Horford, or is it, would you do Jared Allen for Robert Williams III? And who's giving up more in that deal? But could you get, if you're the Cavs, a Brogdon or Derek White out of Boston? Not perfect examples here. The other thing you could look at is just, could you get Nick Claxton from Brooklyn? What does that cost you if they're going to rebuild? Again, he doesn't provide the floor spacing. Although he does have a floor game now, which is super interesting. Is this just a team that could try and pivot to small, whereas Maxey Kleber will become available in Dallas, and so they try and go the lower end route there? Or do they maybe try and take a look at John Collins? But again, who are you giving up in that instance? You have to get someone who represents an upgrade over both of your bigs, I think, if you're going the trade route almost, or just be super small time, because all the primary salary, I don't even want to say filler, all the primary salary matching tools that you have, they're so actually important to your rotation, because they're all your top 7 guys that you can't just junk one of them. Yeah, you have the flexibility to move Al Horford or Robert Williams III, or one of Marcus Smart, Malcolm Brogdon, and Derek White. That doesn't necessarily mean you do it just to do it. I don't have any other names that are springing to mind outside of that. I'm even trying to go through it right now, and it's you're not going to get Jared Vanderbilt from the Los Angeles Lakers. Uh, I guess technically Memphis would still have bigs to spare, but Brandon Clark's probably going to miss all of next year. Steven Adams will be back. Do you try and get Xavier Tillman from them? Are they worried about having to give him an extension? That's again, though, that's like lower level moves. Maybe the ideal get for them, if I had to pick the actual ideal get would be, is there some type of sign and trade to work out with Milwaukee for Brook Lopez? The answer is just no. You're not going to do that. Boston can't be hard capped anyway, but that's the guy. And I had Miles Turner right behind him. I think some people might wonder, well, could it be Karl Anthony Towns? Just as I vary that up. What are you offering for him? Is it Derek White, Horford, and picks? I don't even know if that's getting it done. So those are all the names I have for you, Rome. But I do think that Boston is. I wouldn't necessarily count on it, but let's say they lose in Game 7, or if they just lose unconvincingly in the Eastern Conference Finals. I would say that the Celtics will look more extensively at making some serious changes than I believe that people would have initially thought. We have 2 more questions. I'm already going longer than I wanted to, but let's see if we can get to them. This one comes from Carrigan. But what do you think of a potential Jordan Poole to the Jazz trade? I think he could be given the keys to the offense there, barring something crazy happening in the draft lottery, and the Jazz have the cap space to absorb his contract to help GSW's money situation. So, I guess this, I would assume or presumes that the Warriors would want to get out of Green's money so bad they're willing just to dump it into Utah's cap space. I don't think they're there yet with him, even as scared as they are of their tax bill, where right now, if you bring Draymond back at his player option number, you're looking at basically $500 million in luxury taxes and just raw player salary. Jordan Poole in Utah, especially because of their spacing, that's super interesting. But you already have Colin Sexton. I guess if you don't think you're going to bring back Jordan Clarkson because he's a free agent, there's more rhyme and reason to that. And Poole clearly fits their timeline better. And they're not too guard heavy after that. I don't know what the fuck Taylor Horton Tucker is. He's probably like a wing thingy, like a guard him a wing or something. Are they going to bring Chris Dunn back? There's room for him, I would say. Having Colin Sexton, it feels sort of redundant there, but you can bring Colin Sexton off the bench because that's what you just did. I think the Warriors are going to want value. He's $123 million guaranteed over the next 4 years. Right now there's a case to be made that might be the worst contract in the NBA. I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn there. That's going to have to be something I saved to pose to Grant. So if you're willing to accept it outright, I mean, do you really punt on him like you did? You just punted on James Wiseman. Things are not going well with Jonathan Kuminga because he's not playing. Moses Moody's a mild success story. And then if you are Golden State, what are you getting? Would the Jazz give up just a first-round pick, a throwaway first-round pick, not one of their own? Maybe it's a heavily protected one, a Cleveland first-round pick, one of this year's late first-round picks just to get him? And do the Warriors do that? I think it would be a tough sell because they still view Poole when he's on as super important to what they're doing. And let's say they want assets. And let's say Utah in theory would be willing to give them one. What, like, are they going to want Colin Sexton over Jordan Poole? That's just, you'd probably rather take the upside swing of Jordan Poole at this point still, although maybe you trust the bankability of a Colin Sexton. And then beyond that, Utah just doesn't have a lot to offer. They're not going to give you Akbaji. They're definitely not going to give you Larry Markkinen, and they're not going to give you Walker Kessler. So I would be intrigued if the Warriors are actually looking to dump Poole. I would argue the Spurs should get involved on that, even though he could give Greg Popovich a heart attack. I don't see the pathway to a trade with Utah because I do think the Warriors are going to demand value, and I don't think Utah should or would give up anything of real value for him. And even if they were willing to do that, I don't know what the package looks like here. They're limited in, I'll frame it as material assets. They have the first round picks, but that doesn't mean as much to a team like the Warriors. Yeah, they're concerned about their tax bill, but they also need help now. If they're willing to dump Poole, though, I'm sure that they could find a team that would, like, the Magic could come in and they can create enough cap space while keeping their core intact to do that. Last one comes from Pito. Shout out Pito. Caris LeVert Dylan Brooks sign and trade swap. Who says no? I don't want to say everyone because that feels unnecessarily mean, but definitely the Cavs. They need shooting out of the three spot, not a glorified, like a more damaging Isaac Okoro because he's going to try and do more stuff with the ball in his hands on offense. Um, I do think, Caris LeVert in Memphis is sort of interesting. It's just that other ball handler type who defended better than I thought this year. Didn't have the best playoffs, but he did shoot like better off the catch during the regular season. Could the Grizzlies find use for him? Absolutely. Do they play him with both Bane and Morant? You could try it. Don't necessarily know what it looks like, but I think they would be. I mean, they're looking to get rid of Dylan Brooks anyway. They would. If I were the Grizzlies, you could talk yourself into it if you don't think you can like address a higher end option. I think that they need more of a wing or at least a combo forward. And Caris LeVert is, if you want to call him a wing, that's a little ambitious, but he's not that. So I would say I think both teams probably say no. I think Cleveland's way more likely to say no here. They need caps lock. I think at this point, you just want to get caps lock shooting on the wings, even if it comes in the form of a defensive liability, because we saw how you're going to be defended in the playoffs. And so someone like Dylan Brooks definitely isn't going to cut it. Someone like even Jay Crowder wouldn't cut it. Torrey Craig, no. Max Strus, yeah, you can't afford him. I would say the bare minimum would be, can you get a Josh Richardson and stick him at the three, and he probably provides like the bare minimum of enough shooting. But they need more of a caps lock shooter there. You don't want them to be a defensive liability. Dylan Brooks, the defense would be Dylan Brooks, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen. That would be sort of a wild defensive group. Like, I just feel like you can get a lot of the same stuff outside of Isaac Okoro. Dylan Brooks is going to be better at defending sort of the bigger, burlier guys. He can go up and down their spectrum a little bit more than Isaac Okoro right now. But yeah, no, I can't see this from Cleveland. Thank you all who listen to this. As usual, please remember to subscribe to us if you haven't already, and ratings, reviews on Apple and Spotify. Those help us out a ton. Subscribe to us on YouTube, like, comment the videos. And if you've done all those things, please word of mouth, retweet our promos, anything you can do to help the show continue to grow. Join our Discord. The link to that is in the podcast description, or you can DM me for it if for some reason you can't get it through one of those. Until next time, and as always, I leave you with an apology to Mitchell Robinson and what the hell, and Jared Allen, while also shouting out the one, the only, the indelible Frank Ntilikina.